Welcome to Wines We Drink, a podcast for wine lovers and learners. I'm Charlotte Norsworthy, and together with my counterpart Keith Herndon, we'll be exploring a new wine each week. Keith is a lover of wine, and I am a learner of wine. We hope you'll learn and sip along with us too. Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Wines We Drink, the podcast for wine learners and lovers. This summer is moving along, and today we're joining you for episode 9, and I'm here today with my co-host, as always, Keith Herndon. So happy to be with you again, Keith.
Charlotte, drinking wonderful wine and talking about them with you each week has been the highlight of my summer. Thank you so much for all you do to make Wines We Drink work for our audience.
Well, shucks. I mean, these last 2 weeks we've enjoyed 2 classic summer wines. A Grenache Rosé from the south of France, and then last week a quintessential Pinot Grigio from northeast Italy. So really I should be thanking you for spoiling me and my palate. So if you missed those episodes, you can find them in our archives wherever you get your podcasts. But this week we're returning to the red category. So Keith, what are we drinking today?
Well, after having me select wines that we've enjoyed through our first 8 episodes, we decided to turn to our inner circle and ask some family and friends for ideas. And we chose to go with a wonderful suggestion from Charlotte's father, a California Merlot. We'll get into details about the specific bottle we'll be drinking in a moment, but first let's talk about Merlot in general.
Yeah, I mean, my dad has certainly enjoyed Merlot for a long time. Shout out to you, Dad. It's his go-to wine, and it has been for as long as I can remember. What sets Merlot apart from, say, the Cabernet Sauvignon or the Pinot Noir varietals that we drank in earlier episodes?
I find most Merlots to be more fruit-forward than a lot of other reds, certainly more so than a Cabernet Sauvignon. And I think it appeals to a broader audience because its tannins tend to be softer and less astringent than some of the hardier reds. Merlot went through several down years in sales in the mid-2000s, and a lot of critics blame that on the movie Sideways from 2004. Have you seen it?
No, but I know the cast, and I know that it's been nominated for several awards, but I actually haven't ever seen it.
Okay, well, I put that in your Netflix queue if it's out there on Netflix. It's a wonderful film about wine, but the character played by Paul Giamatti is definitely an anti-Merlot person in the film, and many think that damaged Merlot's reputation. Personally, I think the movie was making a point about a lot of the over-commercialized, rather bland and dull Merlots that were coming out then. More recently, I think Merlot has regained its footing in the market, and there are some really excellent bottles to drink, such as the one we're opening today, that represent an excellent value for the consumer.
Well, and I found it quite interesting from our conversations this summer how certain wines have come in and out of favor and trend and style.
Yeah, we were talking last week about how Pinot Grigio is sometimes challenged as a simple wine. I think Merlot also gets painted with that same brush sometimes. But just because a wine can be described as simple doesn't mean that it's bad. Again, there are those in the wine world that can get carried away with pretentiousness and miss out on some very good values because they have dismissed the wine out of hand.
Well, it definitely from my tastings thus far, it seems like this wine and the Pinot Grigio from last week are going to be delicious and were delicious. And it's an excellent point. I mean, what we're all about here at Wines We Drink is exploring all sorts of wines.
Exactly. I think the history of Merlot makes it a fascinating varietal. Like most of the wines we've talked about, Merlot traces its history to France, right? In this case, the Bordeaux region, and it remains a primary varietal in the classic French Bordeaux red blends. But now Merlot grapes are grown all over the world, and you'll find examples of excellent quality from Italy, Chile, Australia, and Argentina, and especially California.
Wow. Well, it's always really great to get that sense of history when we talk about these varietals, understand how they've taken hold in different countries. I mean, we always talk about the story behind each bottle. So we're drinking a California Merlot today. Can you tell our audience about the specific bottle we're drinking?
Charlotte, we're drinking a bottle made from a Merlot grown on California's Central Coast, primarily in the Monterey County area. We're opening a 2018 Robert Mondavi private selection that's been aged in rum barrels. Just like most of our selection, this one is ranked highly in the Vivino app. Would you believe it comes in the top 4% of all wines in the world, and it won a gold medal in the San Diego International Wine Competition?
Wow, well, I just keep getting spoiled on this show. I mean, with the opportunity to drink such highly rated wines, and I'm going to have to report back to my dad and let him know that he has very fine taste.
Yes, well, the full credit for this selection definitely goes to your father. He made an excellent suggestion, and we thank him for it.
Well, I'm already ready to give this one a try. Will you please pour us a couple of glasses?
Yes, I've had this one decanting for about 15, 20 minutes. It's been aged in barrels, so, a red wine like this, it's kind of good to let it unwind a little bit. Mm-hmm. So, we've had it in a decanter for a little while. It's not necessary that you have to decant this wine. Some people might pour it straight, and you can just let it sit in your glass for a little bit. You can also use an aerator, like a little tool, right? If you'd like to do that as well. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to pour us a couple of glasses straight from the decanter here.
We all need a little decanting every now and then, right? I mean, some unwinding. And as you're pouring it, I mean, for me, it's a beautiful, rich red, almost like a ruby red.
Yeah, you called it a rich ruby red. I'm going to actually call it more of a garnet color.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah. It is very deep. I mean, as you're pouring it, there's no reflection coming off of the glass here. It is, opaque in color, but it catches the light here, and it's just a beautiful, brilliant, deep red color.
Right. So, give it a little bit of a swirl there.
Swirl and sniff.
What kind of flavors or what kind of aromas are you sensing on the nose?
I mean, it's so rich immediately just from the smell. It's such a rich smell, and you can honestly really get that rum barrel aging that's happening here. I mean, rum is something that I am familiar with, unlike wine, and that's definitely coming through and making it very full-bodied smelling.
For me, the word that when I in full transparency, even though this was your dad's suggestion, I did have an advanced sample of this, before we drink it today on the podcast. Not that I didn't trust your dad,
right,
but I wanted to have a little bit of a taste. And the word that immediately leaped to my wine description was jammy.
Ooh, yeah, that's a great word. And definitely one I'm going to pocket in my wine vocabulary here. I mean, it's that describes it really well. I mean, it's such a deep, rich, like it's been cooked down for a while type, type sensation. Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Right. So you mentioned the idea that you could actually get some of the aromas from the wine, from the rum barrel aging. I like to describe that type of an effect as molasses.
Oh, yes. That's great. It's very thick, and I mean, it's really strange to maybe describe it as this, but it's rather homey feeling to me, not just because it's my dad's selection, but, because whenever you're saying words like jammy and molasses, I mean, I'm also getting, some spices too, maybe, like vanilla. Sure. It reminds me of just a home kitchen.
Well, that's phenomenal. It's really interesting how you've picked up on some of these aromas and things. In the official tasting notes, they use the word rich vanilla.
Wow. Right. Man. It must be in my blood.
Okay, so go for the big taste now.
The big taste. Wow.
Isn't that really smooth on the palate?
It's so smooth. I mean, it just rolls down. But the flavors linger in such a beautiful way. I mean, and the jamminess, I mean, that was a great description, and one that often, I mean, and maybe it's the color again, I'm often tricked by sight here, but, the jamminess is coming through in maybe some darker fruits, so maybe some darker berries or darker cherries or something, I don't know, plums,
Plums is exactly in the tasting notes, and how about blueberry?
Oh, yes, that's great. Yeah, I was trying to think, blueberry or blackberry. I mean, that is
definitely these
very prominent.
These very, you described them as dark berries, plum, blueberry, blackberry. All of those flavors are definitely in this glass of wine.
Wow, I mean, it is so beautifully rich. I haven't spent a lot of exploration in the deeper red category, and whenever you actually sit and for a moment with these flavors, you can really grow to appreciate them.
Absolutely. I mean, these flavors just blend together and create such a warming sensation on the palate. I mean, I think that's the way I would describe it. It's not an overly acidic wine. It's very smooth, but you get some of that complexity that putting this wine in those rum barrels and brought out, those nuances that you get, those molasses, those vanilla flavors, those jammy, construct of this wine. It's amazing. I would even say that that putting it in those barrels also added a hint of vanilla to this as well.
And I think that's where a lot of the warmth is coming from that you're describing. I mean, we've up until this point we've been really reminiscing in our summer wines category, and dare I say, this one reminds me just of really comforting warmth, like I'm being wrapped in a blanket and I get to sit down at a fireplace.
Right. I think those are really great observations. Take another taste and give me, your kind of your last impression of the finish of the wine, at the end of the...
I'm definitely, we talked about with our earlier reds this season, the word tannins. And I do get some of that, but in a way that, again, is not overly drying, but it definitely finishes in a nice, a punctuated way.
Right. Well, you can definitely tell it's a red wine, so it's going to have some tannin there, but it's not like a Cabernet Sauvignon where it's much, tannin. I think the best way to describe these are soft. They've softened, the tannins are soft in this wine. As I noted earlier, sometimes Merlot wines get labeled as simple, but I just don't think you can use that description with this selection of Merlot. I think this one is bold but smooth, dry with a soft finish, but this one has added some complexity that you get from that aging in those rum barrels. No one should go in and thinking that you're going to get a wine spiked with rum flavor, right? That's not what this aging process is all about, but it does give it that complexity of oak, and maybe even, if you look at some of the reviews on the Vivino app, people talk about, smoke, right? And maybe even some leathery texture to the wine. So those are all some really interesting perspectives that you get from this.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're right. There's a lot of different flavors and textures on your tongue that's competing for your taste buds, if you will. I mean, some come forward at the beginning, others at the finish, but it's overall, I mean, a really great tasting wine. So I gotta ask, how much is my dad paying for this indulgence?
Well, I think that we can invite your dad into the Value Wine Club. The average price for a bottle of this wine on the Vivino app is just $14.99 a bottle. And the app labels this vintage 2018 as one of its best value for the money selections. It said that wines of similar quality would cost 46% more.
Wow. Well, that's my dad. He's always there looking for a good deal. And I mean, he really found it with this wine.
It's a phenomenally good wine, and this is one that you'll be able to find at multiple different package stores, supermarkets, wherever you look for your wine. Robert Mondavi's obviously a big giant conglomerate winemaker, and they ship all over the world. And I think this is one of those that is really that good deal. Again, just because it's from a big giant, winemaker doesn't mean that it's a bad wine. This is an absolutely great value delicious wine. And I love the fact that they took this Merlot and they put it in these rum barrels and made something very unique out of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, unique is a great descriptor here, and everything is just blending perfectly well.
We spent the previous 2 weeks talking about wines that I call summer sippers, at 14.5% alcohol by volume. I wouldn't put this Merlot in the summer sipper category, but it is still one certainly to consider for your backyard barbecue, because I think this would pair very nicely with those burgers that we're grilling this summer.
Oh, yeah. I mean, here you go again, talking about the backyard grilling, and it gets me hungry every time. But yeah, beef and burgers sounds delicious. I mean, where else would you go with this wine?
Well, with the barrel aging and the complexities that process brought to this Merlot, you certainly can pair it with some great steaks. But if you want to get really fancy, how about some lamb kebabs?
Ooh.
If you want to offer this with some appetizers, I'd suggest finding a bold aged goat cheese. So lamb kebabs and goat cheese, that would be excellent to go with this wine.
Well, when are you having me and my dad over for lamb kebabs? Because I'm so there.
It's a great, barbecue for the summer. Put some lamb kebabs with some of those vegetables on the skewers, and we have a great pairing for this wine.
Yeah, a great evening for sure. So we're going to go ahead and take a short break, but we'll be back soon to wrap up this episode with our weekly wine word feature. This week's word is appellation. Well, welcome back to today's episode. Our wine word this week is appellation. So, Keith, what should our listeners know when they see this wine word?
Charlotte, the word appellation in the context of wine refers to the place where the grapes were grown that were used to make the wine. That's the simple explanation, but it gets really complicated very quickly, because in most countries around the world where viticulture is an important part of the agricultural economy, there have been strict rules and regulations put in place. Across Europe, these rules can be very strict. Think of the Champagne appellation in France. That region is the only one allowed to call the sparkling wine they make champagne. So in the United States, our regulated appellations are known as AVAs, which stands for American Viticultural Areas. Some of these AVAs are very famous, such as California's Napa Valley or Oregon's Willamette Valley. So when you see a bottle of wine labeled Napa Valley, you can be assured that at least 85% of what's in the bottle came from there. But again, you don't have to be snobby about wines only labeled as coming from a specific appellation. The bottle of wine we drank today, for example, was labeled only California. That means that the majority of the Merlot grapes used to make the wine were from the state, but they were blended for more than one appellation. So there you have it. Appellation means the place where the grapes were grown, and it's the basis for a complex set of rules for growing, naming, and labeling the wines we drink. See how I got that little
I see
plug
that.
in there,
I love how you did that. Well, thanks. I mean, now I have one more piece of information about what's on those wine labels, so I feel very well equipped.
So yes, the wine industry doesn't make it easy for us to shop for wines when we're confronted with all those choices in our favorite wine store. But we can begin a little bit of training by doing things like listening to this podcast, right? And then you can begin to get more comfortable with the process and begin to understand what is on all those labels.
Yeah, well, that's certainly the case for me. So, I mean, thanks, Keith. Next week, we're remaining in the red category as we fill our glasses with one of Spain's finest.
I'm so looking forward to talking about the wine that we've selected for next week. A wonderful Tempranillo from Rioja. It is simply delicious.
Oh, wow. Well, I'm looking forward to it as always, but for now, that's a wrap for this week. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Charlotte.
Thanks for listening to Wines We Drink. Listen to our other episodes anywhere you get your podcasts. Be sure to subscribe so you'll be the first to listen to future episodes, and follow us on Twitter @WinesWeDrink and Instagram @TheWinesWeDrink. Cheers.